Welcome back to the second in our series of videos on the internet. We left off in the last one by hearing Dr. Leonard Kleinrock describe the sequence of events that led up to the first long-distance interconnection of computers, the first network. Let's continue. Just as we heard, Dr. J.C.R. Licklider was the head of the Information Processing Techniques Office at the Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA. Dr. Licklider was talking about a symbiosis of man and machines as early as 1958. In 1960, he wrote Man-Computer Symbiosis, a copy of which you'll find on this webpage. The paper described some of his ideas, and once he became involved with ARPA, he was able to move forward with them. Larry Roberts, the principal architect of ARPANET, later recalled the importance of Dr. Licklider's ideas, and I quote, "Lick had this concept of an intergalactic network which he believed everybody could use computers anywhere and get that data anywhere in the world. He didn't envision the number of computers we have today by any means, but he had the same concept, all of the stuff linked together throughout the world, that you could use a remote computer, get data from a remote computer, and use lots of computers in your job. The vision was really Lick's originally. None of us can really claim to have seen that before him, nor can anybody in the world. Lick saw this vision in the early 60s. He didn't have a clue how to build it. He didn't have any idea how to make this happen. But he knew it was important, so he sat down with me and really convinced me that it was important and convinced me into making it happen." That's a quote from a web article titled Internet Pioneers on Dr. Lawrence G. Roberts. It's interesting how the same names keep popping up again and again as we explore the history of the computer. Here's an example: Dr. Ivan Sutherland. Dr. Sutherland was Dr. Licklider's hand-picked successor at IPTO when his own term was up. As we heard previously, Dr. Roberts was influenced by Licklider, as were many others, including Dr. Doug Engelbart, the inventor of the mouse. In August of 1962, Dr. Licklider wrote a series of memos describing a global network in which people could access data and programs from anywhere. Certainly sounds like the internet, doesn't it? He referred to it as an intergalactic network. Ivan Sutherland followed him at ARPA, and then Bob Taylor, who was in charge of that same department from 1968 to 1969, when a lot of really exciting things began to happen. One of ARPA's goals was to connect mainframe computers at different locations so that they could share information. We've already heard from Dr. Leonard Kleinrock. Dr. Kleinrock wrote the first paper on packet switching. Packet switching is a way of breaking a large message into smaller units called packets so that the message can be transmitted from a source to a destination. Lawrence G. Roberts and Thomas Merrill actually made an interstate connection that swapped packets between hosts over a phone line. The result of all this was ARPANET, created in 1969. I found an image that was drawn at the time. The first host was set up at UCLA. Dr. Kleinrock was involved in that installation.
So let me describe the events that took place at the time of the birth of the internet. Here at UCLA, we had a time-shared computer, which was a Scientific Data Systems Sigma 7. And it was serving the population of undergraduate and graduate students here as well as the faculty. Just a computer running time sharing in the 60s. When we decided to create this network, the idea was to build a switch which we called an interface message processor, and that was delivered to us on the Labor Day weekend from Boat Beranek and Newman back in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's the size of a refrigerator. It's what we now call a router. At that time we called it a packet switch because it was using and implementing the packet switching technology that I had developed as a graduate student at MIT. So on September 2nd, the day after Labor Day, we connected this switch to our Sigma 7, and bits began to flow immediately. Everybody was there that day wondering, will it work? And everybody was ready to point the finger at each other if it didn't. Happily, it worked just fine. Next day, we had messages moving back and forth. So this was UCLA, and the time was September 1969. A month later, up at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, another imp arrived in October, and shortly thereafter, they connected their host computer, which was a PDP machine, program data processor machine, a digital equipment machine, to their imp. So this is Stanford Research Institute, SRI, and the period is October 69. So we decided that we would log on from our machine to their machine. And the idea was we'd sit down as if we were a local user on this machine and log on through the network to that machine. Of course, we needed a communications link, and so the first piece of the backbone network ever on the internet was that line from UCLA to SRI. And so on October 29th, 1969, one of my programmers, Charlie Klein, and I were in this room. We decided to log on to this machine. Now, to log on, one has to type in, whoops, let me use another color if I may. One has to type in LOG, and the remote machine will type in the IN. So our job simply was to type in LOG. Now, up at the other end, there was another programmer waiting to watch all of this. And we had a telephone connection between these two. Telephone connection so they could talk to each other. And what happened is Charlie typed the L and he asked, "You get the L?" And the answer was, "Got the L." He typed the O. "You get the O?" "Got the O." He typed the G. "You get the G?" Wacko. The system crashed. This machine went down. So the very first message on the internet ever was low, as in lo and behold. You couldn't ask for a better, more effective message. Now, a month later, another imp was delivered to University of California, Santa Barbara, and they connected their host in, of course. And we had a couple more lines connecting these imps together. And this was in November of 69. And a month after that, a fourth imp was deployed at the University of Utah. And they connected their host computer in. So we had, again, this was December 69. So we had a 4-node network running, and we began to test it and find out what some of the problems were. And we could break this network anytime we wanted. We found faults. We had BBN fix it, etc. So this was the beginning of the internet. You might say that on September 2nd, when this first connection was made, the internet took its first breath of life. And when this message was sent from UCLA to SRI, You might say that the infant internet uttered its first words. The interesting thing is that we did not have a prepared message to send. If you remember that Samuel Morse had a terrific message, "What hath God wrought?" And Alexander Graham Bell had, "Come here, Watson, I need you." And Armstrong said, a giant leap for mankind. Those guys were smart. They understood about public relations and media. They had the press, they had TV in the case of when TV was around. They had recordings, and the record is there. We have no record of this. There was no camera. There was no recording. There was nobody present except the few of us doing this simple connection.
Lo, the very first text message ever sent over the internet. Those drawings, the one he just did and the one you see up here on this screen, look a lot alike, don't they? That is the very first remote network ever created that came to be known as ARPANET. Thank you to UCLA and Dr. Kleinrock for posting that video to YouTube. Let's take a break now and come back when you are ready, and we will continue our series on the internet.